Uh, Howdy, gang. It's great to see you guys tonight. We have a very interesting show, but before we get into that, how you doing, Landon?
I'm good, bud. I'm good. How are you, man?
Living the dream. Not driving across the country like you are, but I'm living the
Uh,
dream.
yeah, it's kind of an interesting position to be doing this right now on the show, but hey, this is a crazy freaking topic, and I wanted to be sure that I was a part of it because this is definitely something I probably would have never even looked into. So
Yeah,
I'm really kind of glad this is a viewer suggestion for sure.
before it was brought up to me, right? I had no idea.
Yeah,
I knew nothing about this topic. I knew nothing about this individual, and I think on one hand, right, I'm really happy that I did this research and that I learned about this topic. But on the other hand, like it's a really dark road to go down.
it's very dark. This is probably one of the darkest shows we've done. I'd have to
I
say.
I mean, and here's the thing, right? This is one of the few shows where, to our knowledge, no one was murdered and no one was hurt. To
Right.
our knowledge. And it's still somehow one of the darker shows that it seems like we're going to be doing. This is, of course, the story of Terry A. Davis and TempleOS. Now, before we really get into the nitty gritty, the details, I do want to say that, like, look, there's going to be some strong language. There are going to be some crazy statements. Terry A. Davis was a schizophrenic genius. And look, I'm not using that word as a way to like defend him. The guy was, I mean, he had elite level intelligence. Um, he says it's so dark because you're driving at night. But he did. He had superior level intelligence, and when you're dealing with a story like this, right, where you really are right in the middle. I thought there were police lights. I thought we were getting off to a great start here. We were so
Don't wish that upon me.
we were so hey, it'd make for great clip. What's that the
Sure
kids do?
would.
YouTube shorts or TikTok? Um so the thing is this treads right in the middle of genius and psychotic. Myself and Joe were talking a little bit before I started the show because this is Joe had requested this. Joe had requested us to talk about this, and I had said, "Man, Joe, this seems a little heavy for me. I don't know." And he said, "I think you guys can make it work." And of course, we're going to try, and we have to be very careful. But what I had said is we were talking about being a genius and being an insane person, and I had said, man, I wouldn't want that curse for either thing. I said, the old saying is that ignorance is bliss, and I said, man, stupidity is bliss, and I'm happy that I'm in that spot because I wouldn't want to be a genius, but I also wouldn't want to be full schizo psychopath either. And with that, once again, I will say, look, there's going to be some strong language. There are going to be some not great things that are talked about in this show. The views of Terry Davis are the views of Terry A. Davis, not the rest of us. And we're simply doing this show to sort of highlight his decline and in hopes that people in a situation similar to he can get out and get the help that they need. So with that, Landon, is there anything you want to say before we get the ball rolling?
No, man, let's get into it.
So in 2008, Terry A. Davis found himself on Reddit. He was sharing his new operating system, which at that time was called Loosethos. It's a site that Terry described as for programming as entertainment because it was fun. Uh, the OS looked like something out of the web of the 1980s, and it was very limited. But Terry had urged that it was made with the modern computer in mind. Uh, if you guys do want to Google, you can see people have taken screen shares of like what the sites looked like. I mean, they were your very basic site. It did look like something you would see in the 1980s, not necessarily in the mid 2000s. But this operating system was something that Terry had been working on since the mid 90s. Um, so because he would go on these sites and he would have people, sort of naysayers, if you will, like attacking his whole operating system. This is what he would post in response to that on his website. He said, quote, I had a 1440 SAT and was a national merit finalist. Fuck yourselves. Which, I mean, I don't know if I mean I don't know if I can find out if that information is accurate. But if that's accurate, I do know that this is his quote. What I'm saying is I don't know if he was a national merit finalist. I don't know what his SATs were. But like he wore his intelligence like a badge of honor because Terry was also on part of being schizophrenic. He was very heavily narcissistic, and we'll get into that more and more as the show goes on. Um, from from that, right, he was his own boss and he had fun programming. Now, the reason that he was his own boss, the reason that he had that ability is because he was on disability. He was living with his parents, and it had been that way since the early 2000s. Uh, Basically, his situation was is that he was found unfit to work due to his schizophrenia, and because of that, he was able to put all of his time into this operating system, and he really would put all of his time into this operating system. There was very little free time in his life to discuss or do anything else. So, from 1990 to 1996, before that, he worked for Ticketmaster. He was in several different positions, but mainly coding and designing. So, Terry A. Davis is somebody who coded and designed for Ticketmaster. Now, when I think of Ticketmaster, right, I think of like modern. I didn't realize Ticketmaster's been around since the early 90s and probably before then, I guess. Um, but I mean, it's right. It's weird to say that a foundation that helped build Ticketmaster was Terry A. Davis, who we will come to despise uh, here in this program.
Yeah,
He would
I think it's kind of important to point out, like this dude, when we're talking about he built an operating system, like he built it from the ground up without using any code from any other system. Like this dude legit was a genius when it comes to the computer and coding and stuff. So he definitely learned something at Ticketmaster, but to create your own system like Microsoft or Linux or something like that, that's super in depth, man.
which he believed that his operating system was superior, which once again goes into that narcissistic nature. But also, I mean, that was his opinion. Is he really believed that like people who used Linus and things like that were just snobs? Um, so he would largely basically just have conversations with himself on Reddit. Like he would be posting about his operating system while also hating on atheists and gay people. Once again, he was a mentally ill narcissist. Okay. Cannot stress that enough. He would calmly put himself, or he would commonly pat himself on the back while using slurs and just simple conversation. Like he would just, no matter what the context of the conversation was, he would use these terrible slurs to describe all sorts of people. He really had a strong dislike for atheists, gay people, the black people, and the CIA. And man, ugh, it's rough. We'll get into it more and more as we do this show. Um, it's rough, and this was early on. Like this, it gets so much worse, right? As his mental fortitude deteriorates more and more, as he refuses to take his medication more and more, as he refuses to get help more and more. The reason that he refused to take his medication is, like so many other people, he claimed that his medication stunted his genius.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are a lot of cases like that. In
Hey,
2000,
do you know Dylan his but before this kind of took off, do you know his like religious background and how that kind of tied into all this? Like where did that come into his life?
So
originally?
he was raised pretty hardcore Catholic, and through the late teenage to early adulthood years, he was actually atheist. He didn't believe in anything. And then he had what he called a revelation from God, and that's what made him religious.
Gotcha.
So yeah, he had what he called a revelation from God, and there aren't really details on what said revelation was. But the idea, wow. Okay, Carter had a 1560. So Carter's someone that we work with at the shop. Joe, of course, Lord Joe Gleghorn. Um, wow, good for Carter. Carter, good job.
Yeah,
Um,
I can't see the chat, so you'll have to tell me when
yeah,
somebody
no, for
says
sure, for sure. Getting back into that, he didn't say what his revelation was, but I assume, and he did say that he believed that God spoke with him, so I assume that was the revelation. That tends to be a pretty common thing with the schizophrenic people because they hear voices, so they think that they're hearing God or they're hearing the wise men or Jesus, like that. That's always their go-to. Um, so in 2009, he doubled down on Reddit, but his account was restricted as he would spam the tech subreddit and other similar sites. In June of 2010, he would delete this account and move over to the site Hacker News, but he was also banned there. Shortly after this time period, he would create demos of how his OS worked. And basically these demos were like he would share these hymns that he created, computer generated. He would share the games that he had created, and all of this in, like, I don't know, 16-bit. I don't know the technical, if you're here looking for the technical information, guys, I'm not that guy. um there are other outlets where they can explain it much better than I. Um, I'm not a tech person, and I apologize for that. But I think it's like 16-bit. There were only like 18 colors used, and it was like comparable to the Commodore 64, 94, something. I don't know, 84, something like that. Um,
yeah, it's interesting. He made it. He made it. He bragged about how his system was the best, but like you talked about in the beginning, like this was really dated for the time that he was putting it out. But he just really believed that like all the new things and what was out there, today and whatnot was just extra, and there was no point for somebody to spend that much time, trying to code things that just didn't matter.
well,
It was bare bones almost, you know what I mean? But
the thing is, biblically, though, right? Biblically, he thought that he had created the third temple, which we'll get into a little bit more. And he had thought that this was a place for people to learn how to worship, and he thought this was a place where people would give their praises and their sacrifices to God. And he never really talked about what sacrifices you should be giving. Like, I don't know what he means by that. What do you mean by that, Terry? Um, but yeah, no, you're 100% right. Is for a guy who talks about how superior his shit is, once again, that narcissistic nature of a man with extreme mental illness who was schizophrenic, right? Um, of course, it seems like everything he did was ripped off, right? Um, so at this point, right, he's making the demos of his OS, he's showing off his hymns, he's showing off his games, and he moves over to Twitter because, of course, he does. And he stopped in 2011 briefly because he was made fun of on the Something Awful forum. Now, I guess the Something Awful forum was uh, like so many other forums where these geeky people get together, right? And they just shit on something. Well, I guess so many sites. he- Terry had been sharing his crazy thought processes on so many sites, right? That people word got around about Terry, and so someone compiled like a bunch of the shit that he had done, and that was what they made fun of on this site. So it did make him take a pause. Um, Then he went back onto Hacker News and he spoke of God's messages to him. He would also refer to his shrinks. And it was around this point that he began just shitting on the CIA. So, real quick warning for anybody. Strong language. First one where I gotta really say, you might want to click off for the next 15 seconds because it's about to get pretty fucking dark. If you wanted to have an idea of how fucked up Terry was in his head, December 28th, 2011, rather, sorry, he would tweet, "Kill CIA people, hit them with cars and run. They're scum." He also claimed to have killed, quote, one in 1999, saying, "Nah, nah, nah, score is one nuttin', "Cept you crushed my nuts." God says, "Horse sung, accents, revenge, wholesome deservings, marrow, funding, necessities." So, yeah, Terry, Terry was not well, right? Um, yeah, Landon, what are we feeling so far here? Like, what's your sort of takeaway from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of need to touch on, he said in that quote you just said that God said this. So I think that to some degree we need to point out how he believes that God is speaking to him. And, you know, I don't know if that's something that you're about to get into. I don't want to jump the gun on you. Um, but, him building this TempleOS system, this operating system he has, believing that it was a temple and it was inspired by God and all this. Essentially, from my understanding, how he got God messages were essentially just like a random number generator attached to a word that was in the Bible, right?
So yeah, we'll get into that in a tad bit. I do want to say that there were forums where people did point out the logical fallacies with the things that Terry would say. Like, you're 100% right. Later, Terry would say that he communicated through God through his operating system. But then
Hey, I'm gonna zip out. I'm gonna come right back.
okay, buddy. So he would talk about how um God was communicating through him through his operating system. And then it would become, or prior to that, though, it had been that God was just communicating with him. So once again, Terry was a severely ill man. And look, guys, I know that it seems like I'm probably being extremely repetitive, but you have to understand, like, looking at through my point of view here, I have to be very careful. um, because look, man, there's people on both sides of this. Look, Terry had loyal fans and followers, and he was a sick man. Does that give him a get out of jail free card for the terrible things that he said and may have done? No. At least not in my opinion. But I really do have to walk that line and try to be as careful as possible. So I hope that you guys understand that. I hope that Landon won't be gone too long because I don't want to get too far and leave him in the dust. But we'll move along here. So he thought that his therapists were hired actors, and he thought that they were hired by the CIA. And around this point in time, he would really double down on his racial beliefs and his racial thoughts, and he would really start ranting and using his racial slurs at an all-time high. So the thing about Terry is that he believed that, like, that black people were the CIA, and he thought that the CIA were all racist, and he thought that they were all atheists, and he thought that they were out to ruin the world. And so he thought that the therapists that he had were hired on by the CIA to destroy him, basically, is the gist of it. Okay. So in 2012, he became the talk of many online forums because he would argue with people just day and night, back and forth. And this was the first time where people were actually like responding to his shit in any way. Normally, people would just scroll past it, or, there was a lot of scrolling because he really did spam these places. But this was the first time where people would actually have a conversation with him, like an open conversation. And some people, of course, would just say that he's crazy and that his operating system was out of date and terrible and that he's a crazy person. And other people would say, hey, Terry, what you did here with your operating system is really like a feat. Like, you should be proud of that, but there's room for improvement. And they would say, like, hey, maybe let's not share these views that are disgusting and terrible, right? And so 2012, we see a surge of people using his site, but it's not many at all, right? So once again, I will reiterate: he was unfit for work because he was schizophrenic. He was on disability. He lived with his parents. And this is the point where we talk about him using his codes to speak with God. So what Landon hit the nail right on the head with what he talked about. Terry said that he had like this number generator, and once again, there are people that will do a better job describing it than me, but my understanding as a layman is that he would input a number code, and that number code would translate a piece of the Bible, and that was how he would communicate with God. Now, there would later be a game that he would use where he would be able to communicate with God, and he would claim that anyone could communicate with God, that it was meant to be like a simulator type deal. Once again, guys, I'm doing my best to explain this, but you, if I understood what a crazy person, you know, if I understood what was going through their head, right, I think I'd be in a pretty dark spot. Um, so in October of 2012, he would launch Sparrow OS. And this would be basically the predecessor to the Laos OS. It was the same thing, right? It was a new under a new name, and this is the first time that forum Kiwi Farms would make fun of him. They would have a whole deal, sort of like the people did before, where they just put him on blast. In March of 2013, it would become TempleOS, and this is where at this point, Terry sharply declined, as we'll get into. So he would create more demos. He would create more showcases of his games, his comics, his hymns. And he would use the site. See, it's very interesting here, right? Because the site not only was God, but the site was also an oracle. And so there was a lot of things happening in his head. He thought that on one hand he was talking to God, but on the other hand there was an oracle, and that's how he himself would use the site and wanted other people to use it as well.
It,
He Go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say, just so people are aware, his OS system was open source, so he wanted people to use it, and it was free for anybody to use and to get in there. So
Yeah, so he would actually describe, he would say that people could use it as an oracle, but they could also use it almost as a Ouija board. At this point in time, he would begin posting his first rants on the OS. Um, he would talk about how he was the chosen one. He would claim that God chose him. And in late 2013, he would begin uploading to YouTube. And he would upload a lot. Um, but he would continue ranting on the OS as well. So in January of 2014, Tech Republic posted an article on Terry and his OS, and they were actually really kind. Like, if you think about it, right, the rest of the internet was really harsh to him. But Tech Republic were really kind. They talked about how, hey, it needs some help, but like this is a technological feat. Um, and this was the first time that he got pretty like, I wouldn't call it national exposure, but like he was published. Like that's a lot of exposure. Um, he would continue to post his hymns. He would continue to post clips of his games on YouTube. Um, and this was the point that his Twitter went batshit crazy. Ladies and gentlemen, again, something really, really, really dark about to come down the pike here. Once again, click off for a couple moments. And once again, Terry Davis was a schizophrenic, mentally ill person. So, quote, the CIA has a 7-year-old deep throating a loaded 45 at the DMV next to me. He's fucking with me. I'll teach him how to pull the trigger. So, Terry A. Davis, everyone. Terry A. Davis. He was a guy who was he was schizophrenic. He was seeing shit. He was hearing shit. Like, and boy, was he sharing his thoughts. On TempleOS, he would shortly thereafter comment, quote, guess what, biatches, daddy's home. A man of few words, right? He would continue his ramblings on the YouTube. He would even make videos who he believed were directly for Larry Page. Larry Page, I think, was like the co-founder of Google or like co-Google person, something along those lines. And he thought that like Larry Page was like watching all of his videos. And so he would make videos specifically for Larry. And of course, in these videos, he would speak of the CIA, God, and race. Uh, this is how Terry described himself. Terry would describe himself as a Reagan Republican elitist. He would call himself Solomon's successor. And he would, of course, continue to shit on shit on the Pope and black people as his rants would continue. I feel like there's a lot to unpack there, right? We just went through a lot of stuff there. Landon, is there anything at this point that you want to sort of bring up, mentions, and anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, to some degree, this guy's starting to get a following. Again, one, because he did something that's very uncommon to create an operating system. It's very genius for you to do. But then two, there was a lot of following for this guy just for the simple fact that he was like cringe master, right? Like things that this guy was saying, you know, it's, I mean, it's human nature, right? A lot of humans follow after the negative stuff. And they were just watching this guy kind of implode on himself. And it's almost like a sadistic thing to even kind of think about, right?
As a student of broadcast, I would like to share a statistic with everyone. So, in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, there was a poll done of Howard Stern listeners. And what they found is that the average Howard Stern listener only listened to the show for like 35 minutes. But the average person who hated Howard Stern would listen for an hour and a half. And when asked why, what they said was, we just wanted to see what he would say next. And I feel like this is a similar situation. Landon, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm the whole time I've heard after looking into this story and stuff, I just keep trying to like understand how the religious thing even came into this at all. Because as you're reading these quotes and stuff, like obviously that's not something that someone who's a devout follower of the Bible would do, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
At least you would think. So it's almost like, I don't know. I keep battling myself of thinking like maybe he was targeting religious people. One, because religious people probably tend to, be more accepting of him because they understood his mental issues or whatnot, and he saw that that's a vulnerable area. I don't. I don't know. I just don't know where that connection happened, because it's so off and on.
Yeah, it's something that, like I said, right? He was raised as a Catholic, and then he would become an atheist, and then, like a flip of a switch, right? He would say that he had this revolution from God. So we don't know what that was, and we don't know what made him not, if there was something. But we know that that happened sometime, probably in the mid 90s. Um, we know that I think it was 1996 when he went and was diagnosed as schizophrenic. So we can assume that it would probably be shortly before there when he had this sort of revelation. Um, but yeah. So, of course, he would go on and his ego would grow. And at this point in time, Vice, which was relatively new but pretty big, right? Vice has been big pretty much out of the gate. They would do an article about him. So now there's even more people who are sort of knowing about this guy. But at this point, right, they actually interviewed him. And this is the first time where he talked about his manic episodes. And that's not my quote. That's literally what he described us. So he, at this point, was at least self aware, right? But once again, refused to take medicine, quit going to all of his therapists and whatnot, like pretty much refused to get help. So in January 2015, he would record a webcam sermon. That's his words, not mine. Um, and he would declare himself as high priest. Um, he was high priest of the third temple, and he really did believe that God himself gave him this uh, ordainedship. Um, by late 2015, his rants would become increasingly aggressive. And in 2016, he would update the site and he would publish his most famous rambling. Now, this is one that I am not going to read. But I am going to pull it up on screen for those of you who'd like to read it. I'm not going to leave it there long. So you can pause it and read it or skip over it. But yeah, so anyone who doesn't want to see this, there are bits that are censored. Trust me, you'll figure it out. But you guys can. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, that's enough of that. So if you missed that, guys, I apologize, but it's one of those things. I'm sure that you all understand. By the way, that video that you saw there down the rabbit hole is a great video to watch. He touches up on all the things that we discuss in this show, but he does a lot more of the technical stuff in depth. So definitely go over there and check that out because it really was helpful for me finding a lot of the information. um, on some day in March of 2016, he would do his first live stream. At this point, the Kiwi Farms Forum would again make fun of him. Over time, he would become more and more unhinged. He would, of course, continue his hate. Um, looks like Landon had to drop out, everyone. It was around this point that he. Before I get into this, I have to give another real quick. This isn't a click off if you're queasy. This is a moment here where I have to say what we're about to discuss is a lady uh, who he had a fantasy relationship with, as far as we can tell. Now, I am not going to mention the lady's name. I am not going to mention her online handle. But it is important to the saga, as later he would actually believe that he was married to this woman. This is the first time that he would mention her, and he would mention her as basically saying that she's someone who has offered to help him. Now, we don't know if they had conversations, um, but we know what he posted and what he would say. Okay. Um, Shortly after this period, he would upload his own phone number to the forum. Now, prior to this, his phone number or his address and name were always on the forum. Like, if someone wanted to theoretically go to his house and do him harm at any point in time, they could have. But at this point, he published his phone number, um, because he speculation on my part, but I think that the guy was probably a lonely fella. Sonia's dropping in. Hi, Sonia. We appreciate it. I assume that the guy was probably a pretty lonely fella, and he probably just wanted people to interact with, and he thought that a lot of these people were his fans, and as you would assume, a lot of people fucked with him. So uh, he would talk about how he was alone. Candidly, once again, you're a schizophrenic, you live with your parents, you can't work. Um, did Terry in fact have a talking space alien? I don't know what Terry had, Joe. If that's a part of the story, I must have missed that. Because it was about an hour or 35 minutes of just information. So I must have missed the flying alien. Um, but he would talk candidly about being alone. Because all he had was his parents, and he fought with them a lot. Their life was hell. At one point, he even did share a live stream where he actually screamed at his parents, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. Um, he would go on after folks would keep poking at him, and at this point, right, he was struggling a lot. He was really teetering, and he would say, quote, "You fuck with God, he fucks your shit up." Once again, Terry is great for a quote. I feel like that should be on a t-shirt. You fuck with God, he fucks your shit up. Landon, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, yeah, I don't even know what to
Oh,
say.
yeah, no,
Like, this
Joe's
dude's
right.
just kind of crazy, and he absolutely hated atheists. So I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Joe's right. I should have. You're right, Joe. Damn it. I wish I would have. See, but I can't read it. During that rant that I pulled up and showed you guys, he did talk about his space alien. Yes, Joe is correct. He also talked about being in a CIA prison, and he would go over all of the sins that he had committed, which some of them get pretty graphic. So, um, yeah. Um, moving on. So Terry would state that or I apologize. Folks then began encouraging his behavior uh, until he was banned from live streaming. He was banned because he showed pornographic images. So, what one of his fans had done is they had taken images of this lady who he was deeply fixated with and talked about all the time, and they had created like a deep fake, basically. So this was deep fake before deep fake was a thing. And Terry showed this on stream. And of course, they took away, they didn't nuke his YouTube account. He was still able to post videos, but he couldn't go live anymore. Isn't that crazy that back in 2015, you could literally show naughty bits and only get a slap on the cuffs? That's wild to me. So, he would then begin uploading on the site Hitbox, and someone would steal his account. They would somehow get his password. Oh, Joe says, check your phone. I sent over the alien lore. Okay, I have to read this really quick to see if I can do this. Um,
Yeah, I don't remember the alien thing, but that
it
would
was
not surprise me. I mean,
it was in the very long rant. He talked about how the CIA was trying to steal his alien, and he was in like a Russian CIA camp or some shit. Um,
gotcha.
So this person what they say is he says, figured out what space alien is. He says, I was fucking around on Terry's old TempleOS website a few days ago, watching his video lectures, and one of them he mentions the 1997 movie Contact, in which space aliens send plans for machines to Earth. Terry then says that this machine is TempleOS, the third temple, and it's his job to build it. God, you know what this sound? Oh, I can't say that. We'll get in trouble. I was gonna say something not brutal, but I was going to compare it to a religion that also has crazy alien beliefs. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But we'll have strange men knocking on our doors tomorrow with cease and desists. You can all figure it out on your own, I'm sure. There's a
Right.
lot of famous actors. One of them flies planes. Um, so he's saying that the idea of TempleOS was conveyed to him by an extraterrestrial life form. After all this time, I assume that space alien was interchangeable with God. Obviously, the two are related in so far as the development of the OS, but nevertheless separated beings according to him. So thank you for that, Joe. That was very educational. Jesus, Sonia's talking about handies in the comments. Sonia, what the fuck? You're off air and you lose your mind? Fuck.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Go figure.
God damn it. See, she could have been on air talking about handies.
See, all of y'all think that Sonia is this innocent person.
Yeah,
She's not.
they think that like I'm the monster, you know.
Right.
Yeah, so I will point that out because that's fair. Joe comments that in his big rant, Terry claims that he got a blowjob from one of his aliens. So yes, he did refer to aliens in this big rant, along with many other things that involve his brother and a vacuum and a dog and running someone over. There was a lot of stuff. I mean, he really
I was
did.
gonna say the alien part was probably pretty easy to forget with all the other shit
Yeah,
that was
there
in
was a
that.
lot.
So,
There was a lot. Um, So, uh, so now that he was banned from, or wait, sorry, pause. I have to go back up. I'm sorry. I missed my place there. So he would then begin uploading on Hitbox, and someone stole his account. We don't know how, but they somehow got his password and information. They stole his account, so he created a second account, and the second account was also stolen, like within days. But he would, during this time, still continue to post his hymns on the YouTube. He would also vlog his what he called paladin walks, and he would harass a black man on one of his streams. This would get him banned, and so now he couldn't post on YouTube, and the only place that he would post was TempleOS. So to explain what sort of transpired, right, he would go on these walks around his home. Vegas is where he lived with his parents, and he would go and like walk around and talk. And there was an African American on the street who he called a racial slur, and there was an interaction, and it wasn't great. And so moving on, that's all the exposition that's really needed there.
hey, I'll just say he got really lucky. He didn't get his ass beat on that camera.
100%,
Like
100.
that guy was very calm and just kind of let it go. But dude, he
Yeah.
really could have
Yeah.
got messed up there.
Um, so it would be around this point that he would post a video where he argued with his parents. It was also around this point in time that he would talk about drinking a lot. Um, he would also even more stop taking his meds. August 25th, 2017, he would be arrested for fighting his father. Uh, at this point, basically, his parents did everything that they could do, and they said, "Hey, we're done. You can't live here anymore." And so he was homeless. And crazily enough, right? 4chan and 8chan, people who had also made fun of him in the past on top of Kiwi farms and whatnot, they would fund him. Like, they would send him donations. People felt bad for Terry. Um, so on September 20th, he was arrested for pissing in public. He was pissing in his van, and I guess someone must have seen him, and so yeah, he was arrested. He would then be arrested again because he didn't show up to court, and someone on 4chan bailed him out. I just want to take a second. These are people who don't know him. These are people who, in some cases, made his life miserable. When you think of 4chan, you think of the dregs of society, the dregs of the internet. They bailed him out. That's wild to me. Um, he would continue to stream on his site, and he would be using his phone at this point, and some of his content got pretty graphic. It was around this point in time that he did believe that that woman that he was really fascinated with he thought they were married, and he thought that the site was like an intimate place for her to visit him, and so he would film himself engaging in solo activities, and he would mark it in a folder basically called like for her. So once again, when you think of religion, you're not really thinking self pleasure, but yeah, whatever. Moving on. Once again, severely mentally ill, schizophrenic man. Used to live with his parents, now is homeless. In January of 2018, he again missed a court date. But he would upload a video in an unknown house and then disappear. And this is a very interesting saga because we don't have any information on whose house he was in or anything. Like, uh, this was a weird time, man. This was a weird time. And I wish I could say more or explain more, but I can't. In March of 2018, he was homeless and he was in Oregon. He would be back to streaming on his phone. He would continue to ramble incoherently. Of course, folks would track him down and they would actually feed him. And several people would sit down and like interview him. And the crazy thing about it is he would actually give really comprehensive interviews. He would talk about working for Ticketmaster. He would talk about creating his OS. And like, for a crazy person, he was like, at this point, he was still able to, create thought. Like he had deep conversations with these folks. By May 2018, he had thought that he was psychically communicating with Elon Musk and General Mad Dog Madsen. And by August, he would begin slurring his speech. So at this point, right, 2018 was just downhill. And it will get worse from here. His last year on Earth, right, even though he was mentally ill, even though we can say he was a terrible person, right, his last year on Earth was hell, you know. So he would begin slurring his speech in videos. And in August of 2018, Terry would unexpectedly pass away. There were a lot of folks on 4chan who believed that it was a hoax, but on August 11th, 2018, it would be learned that he was hit and killed by a train. The train conductor thought that it was definitely a suicide. There was a family member, I think it was a sister, who had posted basically a eulogy on Facebook. And basically what she would say is we lost our very special angel. I know that my brother had a lot of followers and a lot of fans. And the 4chan people thought it was a hoax until they did research and they learned it wasn't. Once again, Terry was very sick. He was, once again, schizophrenic, unable to work. He had terrible beliefs, but he was a very sick man. And for all of his faults, in a lot of cases, he did think that he was helping people. He thought he was helping people to find religion. He thought he was helping people to communicate with God. And regardless of if you believe in religion or believe in a God or whatever, he this is a guy who was unfit for work, but created an operating system to try to give people a place to worship. You know, like for me, I understand why. And once again, not saying that the things that he believed or said or did were right, but it's easy to see why so many people did have a soft spot for him in their heart and why people were sympathetic to him. Um, and once again, if there's any good that comes out of this story, it is that strangers on the internet helped this man. Like, they bailed him out of jail, they fed him, they may have housed him. We don't know where, we don't know. But with that, we've actually done far longer than I thought we would do, Landon. Um, I think it is time for final thoughts, though, Landon. Would you like to start with final thoughts?
Yeah, honestly, this story could have went a lot longer if it have went more technical.
Yeah.
Obviously that's neither one of our wheelhouses, but I looking at this story, and I just can't. I just keep thinking about, you know, just think of, like, for one, our system is terrible for aid and helping people with mental disabilities and things like that. There's obviously a huge opportunity there, but it also just kind of points out, again, as we've talked many times, of how religion can be very harmful to certain groups of people, who are either mentally unstable or just mentally weak. And
Yeah.
again, just be careful what you believe. Just be careful what you live for, because at the end of the day, I'll, imagine if there wasn't any religion, would he have
Yeah.
even thought of doing these things?
Yeah.
And would he have really thought that he's kind of a god? That's just personally what I think when I hear this whole
Yeah.
story.
Um, Sonia, if you are watching, we are doing final thoughts. So if you have something to type up, now is the time to do it. Really quick before I get into my final thought, I do want to say that I did leave parts of the story out. And there were things that I left out for time. There were other things that I left out because um, they needed to be. But something that I left out for time that in retrospect, I guess I shouldn't have, is that this OS was not the only thing that Terry would create. He actually had something from my understanding, it was like an early form of a 3D printer, like in the early 90s. And the only reason he didn't pursue it is because it caught his house on fire at some point or something. And then he had a whole other thing that he had worked, like a business type deal. So he was an innovator. Once again, look, not defending the guy, but Christ, I mean, that's a lot to overcome, you know? And in a sense, like, that's a sympathetic tale, right? Like, that's a lot of shit to overcome. Um, Sonia says, acknowledging the good that you already have in your life is a foundation for all abundance. You sound real pretty when you use them nice words. I tell you what, Landon, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I was just going to say, again, thanks to Joe for submitting this one, because this is definitely something I would have never even
We would have
fallen into,
never,
this rabbit hole.
we would have
So
never, yeah.
yeah, so thank you to Joe. To everybody listening, I know this has kind of been 2 weeks in a row that we've had quite a depressing story, if you will.
Oh, make
Um,
it 3 because next week's about to. Oof.
so that's what I was going to bring up, and I was like, just keep your seatbelts on, because we still got one more week of depressing stories.
I promise that we will do. I we'll do something. I don't want to say happy, but we'll do something that is less dark and deep soon.
Yeah.
Joe says the technical stuff about TempleOS was cool though. He had a flight simulator that ran on 2 megabytes. Yeah, like I said, look, Joe, I hope you understand. I did the best that I could. The tech stuff, you don't want me explaining tech stuff. He did. He had a lot of cool stuff. He created games. He created hymns that were computer generated based off of numbers and sequences. He had a lot of stuff that he created that really was groundbreaking, really was crazy. And there are a lot of people who may want to shit on that side of what he did, but that stuff really was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
The other stuff was just shitty. He was a shitty person. But there again, mentally ill man, schizophrenic.
It's almost like there's two different people in it was mind, like he was two different people. Like it's so crazy to hear some of the stuff and then hear the other stuff came out of the same person, it's just unbelievable.
It really is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Joe brings up something interesting, which could be a stretch, but he says, why don't you do the true story behind Lawless? If you've never seen the movie, it's a great movie about moonshining.
Yep.
We could maybe make
that.
That's under it's a crime. Bootlegging's a crime. I would say
oh, go ahead.
We can make that work. Good suggestion, Joe. I'll try to fit that in at some point, not too far. Like I said, we do still have some things that we have to cover. There are a couple of things.
I definitely got a case, Dylan, that just popped up in actually the town that I live in. Two guys who were wrongfully convicted of a murder 24 years ago just got released this past week, right here in my hometown. So I definitely think, and the reason they got exonerated was actually from a podcast who uncovered evidence that other people didn't see. So, that might be a cool story that we can cover at some point. And I'm on scene. I can get pictures and everything like that. What's what it looks like today. So who knows? Maybe even get them on there.
Yeah, maybe that's something we do. Like I said, I'll look into it. I guess I have to give my final thoughts, huh?
Yeah.
So I will give first the final thoughts, because it's not my final thoughts, but there was a comment on the video that I used as a big source. Once again, that video, if you type in TempleOS down the rabbit hole on YouTube, it'll pop up. It was a great video, a great source. But one of the top comments said this, and I thought that it was such a great quote. He says, "When you antagonize someone with mental illness, you only make things worse." And I thought that was a great sort of bring it home type of statement. But my quote is going to be, and by the way, this is a very Sonia type of quote, but let me see if I can remember it right. The same pot of boiling water that can hard boil an egg makes a potato soft. And so you have to dictate how you react to your environment and not the other way around. With that, everyone, we thank you for joining us on this Saturday night. We appreciate you all. Again, Joe, thank you for it was a great recommendation that we wouldn't have searched for. Like, I wouldn't have known anything about this if it wasn't for you requesting this show and talking about it. I hope I did it justice. To anyone else who may be watching, Sonia, great co-host, and Landon, thank you for joining during your drive. Take care, all.